The November wind off Lake Ontario had teeth that year, the kind that found the gaps in your coat, no matter how tightly you pulled it closed. Oliver Granted noticed the boy first because of the shoes. He was sitting at a corner table in the Anchor, a restaurant in Kingston's old waterfront district that Oliver had been coming to for 11 years, since before the renovation, since before the awards, since before the profile in Toronto Life had described him as the architect who gave the Great Lakes their voice back. The boy was maybe 10, 11 at most, standing just inside the doorway with one hand still on the heavy brass handle, wearing a winter jacket 2 sizes too large and sneakers so worn at the toe that Oliver could see the dark wool of mismatched socks beneath. He wasn't begging. That was the thing Oliver would remember later. He wasn't holding out his hand or looking at anyone with that particular studied desperation. He was just standing there, holding a paper bag against his chest like it contained at Oliver's table, looking at Oliver's table. Not at Oliver. At the plate. Oliver had ordered the lake trout. He hadn't been particularly hungry. A project meeting had run 4 hours longer than it should have, and he'd come to the Anchor, mostly out of habit, the way you return to places that have held you through enough difficult evenings that they start to feel like a person rather than a room. He'd eaten perhaps a third of what was on his plate. The boy's eyes moved from the trout to the untouched roll in the breadbasket, and then, very quickly, back to the floor. Oliver put down his fork. He watched the boy for a moment longer. The hostess was moving toward him now, her expression professionally kind but unmistakably firm, and Oliver understood what was about to happen. He raised his hand. "He's with me," he said. The boy's name was Theo. He told Oliver this after a silence that lasted through the hostess retreating, through Oliver pulling out the chair across from him, through a full minute of the boy simply standing with his paper bag and his worn-out shoes, deciding whether the kindness was real. "Theo," Oliver repeated. "Do you want to sit down, Theo?" Another pause. Then he sat, placing the paper bag on his lap with both hands wrapped around it. "You don't have to explain anything," Oliver said. He meant it. He was 53 years old, and he had learned, mostly through his own failures at receiving grace, that nothing closed a person off faster than being asked to justify their need for help. He signaled the server and ordered a second plate of the trout. Then, because he thought the boy might need something to do with his hands, he pushed the breadbasket across the table. Theo took a roll. He ate it the way children eat when they've been told not to ask for too much, carefully, steadily, without looking up. "Is that bag important?" Oliver asked, nodding at the paper bag still balanced on his lap. Theo looked down at it. "It's my grandma's medication," he said. "I picked it up from the pharmacy on Princess Street. I was walking home and it started raining and I didn't want it to get wet." He paused. "I came in here because the awning was dripping on me and this door was open." Oliver looked outside. The rain had turned to sleet, the kind that didn't commit to being either thing properly. "Where does your grandmother live?" "Concession Street, the East End." That was nearly 4 kilometers from where they were sitting. "And you walked here from Princess Street in this?" Theo shrugged in the way children shrug when they want to minimize something they know an adult will find alarming. "I do it sometimes." The server brought the second plate of trout. Theo looked at it and then looked at Oliver, and Oliver understood the look and nodded, and Theo ate. He ate quietly and without rushing. And Oliver found himself strangely moved by this, by the restraint in it, by the fact that this boy, who was clearly very hungry, had enough dignity not to devour the meal in front of a stranger. He talked a little while he ate, in the sparse, factual way that children talk when they're trying to give you just enough to answer your questions, without giving you more than they've decided to trust you with. His name was Theodore James Hadley, but only his teachers called him Theodore. He was 11. He lived with his grandmother, Bea, who had been sick since the spring. Her heart, he said simply, as though hearts were just another thing that occasionally stopped working right. His mother had left when he was 6. His father worked in Fort McMurray and called sometimes. "Does he know your grandmother is sick?" Oliver asked. "I told him," Theo said. The careful neutrality in those 3 words contained something Oliver recognized. He had grown up in a house where the adults were too busy surviving their own troubles to fully register anyone else's, and he knew the particular flatness that settled into a child's voice when they had learned to stop expecting rescue from the people they'd originally counted on. "Who takes care of you both?" Oliver said. While she's sick. I do, Theo said, as though this were obvious. Oliver was quiet for a moment. How long have you been doing that? Theo considered. Since June, when she couldn't do the stairs anymore. It was November. 5 months. An 11-year-old boy had been running a household, collecting medications in the rain, doing what needed to be done for 5 months. Oliver looked out at the sleet coming sideways off the lake and said, I'll drive you home. Bea Hadley was a small woman who had clearly once been a larger presence. You could see it in the way the room was arranged around her armchair near the window. Everything within reach, everything organized with the kind of careful system that belonged to a person who had once moved efficiently through the world and was now adapting to a narrower one. She had white hair pinned neatly back and eyes that were dark and still sharp, and when Oliver came through the door behind Theo, she looked at her grandson first, checking him the way you check someone you love when they've been out in weather, and then she looked at Oliver with an expression that was not afraid but was very attentive. Grandma, this is Mr. Granted, Theo said. He drove me from downtown. Oliver said. He was holding a bag from the restaurant. He'd asked the kitchen to put together some food before they left. I hope this is all right. I was sure, sit down, Bea said. She said it the way people say it, when hospitality is not optional. Theo, put the kettle on. Oliver sat. The apartment was small and genuinely cold. The kind of cold that suggested a heating problem that hadn't been reported or hadn't been fixed, one of those small institutional failures that compound daily in the lives of people who don't have the energy or the leverage to push back against them. There was a child's homework spread on the kitchen table, a library book on the arm of the sofa, a get-well-soon card on the windowsill that had been there long enough to fade at the edges. He's a good boy, Bea said, watching Oliver's eyes move around the room. She said it with a ferocity that was quiet but absolute, the way you state a fact about the earth being round. I can see that, Oliver said, and he meant it entirely. He doesn't tell people, she said, about how things are. He doesn't want anyone to worry. He didn't tell me, Oliver said. He didn't have to. Some things are visible. Bea studied him for a moment. What is it you do, Oliver? I'm an architect. I have a firm here in Kingston. She nodded slowly, as though fitting this information into a framework she was building. Do you have family? Not here, he said. My wife passed 4 years ago. Our son is in Vancouver. Something shifted in Bea's expression, not pity, which Oliver would have deflected, but a kind of recognition, the particular acknowledgement that passes between people who know what it is to be the last person standing in a room that was once full. Theo came back with the tea and sat at the kitchen table and pretended to do his homework, and Oliver understood that the boy was listening to every word. He told himself, driving home, that it was a single evening, that he had done what any decent person would do, given a hungry child a meal, driven him home in bad weather, made sure the grandmother was all right. That was the end of it. That was sufficient. He believed this for approximately 4 days. On the 5th day, he drove past the building on Concession Street on his way to a site visit and noticed that the ground floor unit, Bea's unit, he knew, because the arrangement of the windows matched what he'd seen from inside, had plastic sheeting over one of the windows instead of glass. He stopped the car. He sat there for a moment, his hands on the wheel, his breath making small clouds in the cold interior. Then he got out. The property manager, a man named Don, who ran the building with the detached efficiency of someone who had long since stopped seeing the people in it as people, told Oliver that the window had been reported in September. The work order was pending. These things took time. It's November, Oliver said. I understand that. There's an elderly woman with a heart condition and a child living in that unit. I understand that too, Don said. Oliver was not, by nature, a man who used his position or his profile as leverage. He found it distasteful, the way some people wore success like a weapon. But he stood in Don's office for another 4 minutes, speaking quietly and specifically about what he intended to do if the window was not replaced by the end of the week, and Don made the call. The window was replaced in 2 days. Oliver didn't tell Bea he'd been involved. He didn't tell Theo either. But on the Saturday morning after the work was done, he found himself standing in the produce section of the Kingston Farmers Market, on King Street, holding a bag of apples and thinking that Theo had mentioned, in passing, that his grandmother liked apple cake and that he had no particular reason to be buying apples. He bought the apples. He bought other things too, staples quietly chosen, the kind of food that stretched and lasted. He left them outside the door with a note that said, "Only hope you're keeping warm." OG. He became gradually in the way that important things usually happen, not all at once but incrementally, each small choice leading to the next until you look back and can't identify the exact moment the direction changed, a fixture in their lives. He came on Saturday mornings. He sat with Bea while Theo was at hockey, a community league, the equipment borrowed, the registration fee paid by someone Theo assumed was a program subsidy, and Oliver did not correct. And Bea talked to him about Kingston as she had known it, about her late husband Gerald, who had been a machinist at the shipyard, about the year the ice storm had taken down half the trees on their street, and the neighborhood had organized to clear the roads themselves because the city trucks couldn't get through. She told these stories with the pleasure of a person who has stories worth telling and hasn't recently had anyone interested in hearing them, and Oliver, whose own grief had made him quiet and sealed, found that listening was easier than he'd expected, that it was, in fact, a relief. Theo showed him his school projects, a model of a suspension bridge built from popsicle sticks, an essay on Vimy Ridge that had gotten an A-, which Theo felt was a borderline injustice. Oliver read the essay and agreed that it was probably closer to an A, and Theo looked at him with an expression of vindicated seriousness. "You understand architecture," Oliver said, studying the bridge. "Look at this load distribution. Did your teacher show you how to do this?" "No," Theo said. "I just thought about how it would have to work." Oliver turned the bridge over in his hands. "Have you ever been to the engineering wing at Queen's?" Theo hadn't. "I'll take you sometime," Oliver said. "If your grandmother says it's all right." Bay, from the armchair, said it was all right. The trouble came in February, as trouble often does, quietly, in the middle of the ordinary, when you've stopped bracing for it. Oliver had a business partner named Hugh, who was charming in a way that Oliver had long since understood concealed something harder underneath. Hugh had come into the firm 12 years ago, and he was good at his work, and they had built something genuine together. But Hugh was also the kind of man who calculated the value of relationships the way you'd calculate the load-bearing capacity of a beam. Precisely, coldly, with an eye toward what could be extracted before the structure was no longer useful. Hugh had begun to notice Oliver's weekends. He had also begun, Oliver realized slowly, to ask questions about Bea's building, about the landlord, about the property. Hugh knew people in development. The east end of Kingston was changing. Old buildings on large lots were worth looking at differently than they used to be. "I was talking to someone at City Hall," Hugh said at lunch one Wednesday, in the careful way he had of introducing things he wanted Oliver to ignore his instincts about. "The Concession Street corridor. There's potential there. Some of those older rental buildings, if the owners wanted to sell." "No," Oliver said. Hugh looked at him. "Whatever you're building to," Oliver said. "No. I'm just saying, I know what you're saying." There was a silence between them that contained 12 years of partnership and whatever was on the other side of it. "You've gotten personally involved," Hugh said, "with these people. That's not like you." Oliver thought about this on the drive home. Not like you. As though he'd been consistent, as though there had been a version of himself, pre-Theo and Bea, who had been fully present in his own life, rather than going through its motions with the carefully managed absence of a man who had lost the thing that made his days feel real. He stopped the car outside the building on Concession Street. The new window was fogged from the warmth inside. He talked to Bea about it. Not all of it. Not Hugh's specific interest, because he didn't want to frighten her, and not the full extent of what he now understood was possible, in terms of his own resources and what they could mean for her and Theo's stability. But he talked to her honestly, which was something he had not done with many people in 4 years. "I want to help," he said, more formally than I have been. "I want to make sure that when you—" He stopped. Bea looked at him without flinching. "When I'm gone," she said. "Yes, say it," she said, not unkindly. "Gerald used to do the same thing. Talk around the edge of it," I told him. "You can say the word. It doesn't make it arrive faster." Oliver almost smiled. "When you're gone," he said, "I want Theo to have somewhere stable to land. I want it arranged properly, legally, not dependent on my goodwill, but actually structured." Bea was quiet for a long time. Outside, a snowplow was moving slowly down Concession Street, its orange light turning through the room. "Why?" she said. It was a genuine question, not suspicious, not testing him. Genuinely curious in the way of a woman who had lived long enough to want accurate answers to important questions. Oliver thought about it carefully, the way he thought about structures, about what was actually holding something up beneath the surface of what was visible. "Because I've been useful in my life," he said finally, "but I haven't always been present. And I think," he paused, "I think Theo is the first person in a long time who has made me feel like being present matters, and I don't want to walk away from that and tell myself I didn't know what it was." Bea looked at him for a long moment. "Gerald would have liked you," she said. The legal arrangements took 3 months, and the involvement of Oliver's solicitor and a family court mediator, and, eventually, a very long conversation between Oliver and Theo's father in Fort McMurray that was uncomfortable and honest in equal measure, and at the end of which Theo's father had said, with the mixture of relief and shame that honest men feel when someone else steps into the space they left empty, "Take care of him, please." Hugh left the firm in April. It wasn't dramatic. Oliver bought him out at fair value and they shook hands, and that was that. Some partnerships are buildings that have served their purpose and don't need to be preserved. Oliver hired 2 new junior architects and a project manager who had gone to Queens, and one afternoon in May, when the lilacs along the waterfront were doing what Kingston lilacs do every spring, sudden and excessive and faintly miraculous, he brought Theo to the office and showed him the drafting tables and the model of the harbor redevelopment project on the wall, and Theo walked along the wall very slowly, studying it. "Why is this section different from this section?" he asked, pointing. "Because that section has to accommodate the existing sewer infrastructure," Oliver said. "So we couldn't go below a certain depth. It changed the whole approach to the foundation." Theo considered this. "So you worked around what was already there." "That's most of architecture," Oliver said. "You work with what the ground tells you." Theo nodded slowly, still looking at the model. "Could I ever?" he started. Then he stopped. "Could you ever what?" Theo looked at him. He had his grandmother's eyes, Oliver had noticed, dark and still, and paying attention to everything. "Could I ever learn to do this?" Oliver looked at the boy standing in his office in the May light, 11 years old, with his worn-out sneakers replaced now by decent ones, still carrying himself with that particular straightness of a child who had learned early that no one else was going to hold him up. "Theo," he said, "that is the least uncertain thing I know. Bea died in September, just as the maples along Concession Street were beginning to turn. She had known it was coming, had been calm about it in the way she was calm about everything, which was not the absence of feeling, but the presence of enough feeling that she no longer needed to perform it. She had spent her last good weeks telling Theo the thing she wanted him to know, that his mother's leaving had not been his fault, and never had been, that his father was doing his best with what he had, that she had loved every ordinary Tuesday of the life they'd built together in that small apartment, the homework on the kitchen table and the library books and the apple cake and all of it, and that ordinary Tuesday love was the realest kind there was. She told Oliver, the last time they sat together, that she was glad he'd come in out of the rain. "I was the one outside," he said. "I know," she said. "I meant your rain." The photograph was Theo's idea. He wanted one of the 3 of them, from before, him and Bea and Oliver on the waterfront in the summer, squinting into the light, the lake enormous and silver behind them. Oliver found it on his phone and had it printed large and framed it, and it sat on the mantelpiece in the house on Earl Street that Oliver had bought with 3 bedrooms specifically, so that Theo would have space, and then a room to come back to, and then, always, a place that was his. On the first morning after the legal guardianship was finalized, Theo came downstairs and stood in the kitchen doorway in the particular way children stand when they are testing whether a good thing is real, waiting for it to dissolve the way good things sometimes do. Oliver was making eggs. "How do you want them?" he asked without turning around. There was a pause. "Scrambled," Theo said. "Please." Oliver cracked 2 more eggs into the pan. Outside, the maple on Earl Street had gone entirely gold, the way Kingston maples do in October, brief and unreasonable and very beautiful, and the morning light came through the kitchen window and made the room feel like something worth staying in.